Most folks see a cleanup pile and think trash or compost. I want to show you a third way to look at it.
Two buckets. One is headed for the burn pile. The other is headed back out to the garden. And most people couldn't tell you which is which just by looking. Tomato suckers, bean pods that dried on the vine, lettuce that bolted and went to seed, fallen leaves, flattened cardboard, a coffee can of ash out of the wood stove, eggshells, a tangle of grape prunings I cut back in February. Most folks look at a pile like that and see cleanup. The generation before mine would have looked at a good bit of it and seen next year's garden. And no, they would not have shoveled all of it into a compost pile. That's the part that gets missed, and it's the part I want to spend the next half hour on, because a tomato sucker isn't compost. It's a whole other tomato plant, if you know what to do with it. A layer of leaves may be worth more to your ground as a roof than as fertilizer. An apple branch you were about to burn might be carrying the exact variety you've been trying to hang on to. And a dead, hollow stem can end up producing more food for you than half of what's in your compost pile, not by feeding a plant, by housing an insect. 25 of these. Number 23 is something a lot of gardeners still dump straight onto their tomato beds because somebody told them it was free fertilizer. Used wrong, it can work against you for years. We'll get there. Most of us were taught to sort garden material two ways: useful and trash. That's too coarse. There are 5 kinds of value in a cleanup pile, and they are not interchangeable. First is genetics. A seed head can carry traits that got selected over many seasons, in your dirt, in your weather, by your hand. You can't buy that back. Second is living plant material. Some of what you cut off a plant is still alive enough to become another plant. Third is carbon, not fertilizer. Carbon is what soil life is built out of. Fourth is water management. A covering on the ground changes how much water stays in it, how many weeds come up through it, and how far the temperature swings between a hot afternoon and a cold night. Fifth is ecology. Some material's best job isn't feeding your plants at all. It's sheltering something that helps your plants. Here's the shift. Modern gardeners look at a pile and ask, what nutrients?
Start with the easiest wins first, the scraps that are still alive enough to become something again.
Are in this. The better question, and the one running under all 25 of these. What job can this still do? Let's start with the ones that are still alive. Number 1, dried bean pods. At the end of a bean patch, there's always a scatter of pods that went leathery and yellow before you could pick them. Everybody's instinct is to rake them up. Don't rake them all. Pick the pods on the healthiest, most productive vines, the ones that gave you what you actually wanted, and let those go dry and papery on the plant. Shell them, dry the seed thoroughly, store it cool in low humidity. The value in that pod is not the little bit of nitrogen in the hull. It's the genetics inside it. And around here, that's not a small thing. West Virginia University has documented heritage pole and half-runner beans that families have been selecting in these mountains for generations, with names like Turkey Craw and Logan Giant. Those beans exist because somebody's grandmother declined to rake up a pod. One practical number. UVU notes bean varieties separated by 20 to 25 feet can be saved for seed without much worry about mixing. Number 2. Tomato seeds. Don't save seed off every tomato you eat. Think like a selector. Which plant held up when it turned hot and dry? Which one didn't fold when the disease came through in August? That's the plant you save from, even if its fruit wasn't the biggest on the row. And stay with open-pollinated or heirloom types. Seed off a hybrid grows fine, but the offspring scatter in every direction. The mistake is saving from the biggest tomato. Save from the plant you'd most want to grow again. Those aren't always the same plant. Number 3. Bolted lettuce, radish, and brassica seed heads. A gardener sees lettuce shoot up a flower stalk in July and calls it a failure. Wasted row. But that plant is finally doing the one job it was built for. Leave 2 or 3 of the best ones standing. When the heads dry and start to shatter, slip a paper sack over the top, bend it down, and shake. You'll get...
Saving a seed and saving a variety are not always the same thing. With squash, that difference matters fast.
More lettuce seed off one plant than you'd ever buy in a packet. Radishes do the same, and so do mustard and kale, though those cross freely, so keep one kind flowering at a time. A harvest failure and a seed crop can be the same plant. Number 4. The last squash and pumpkin seeds. Here's where a lot of good advice goes sideways. Saving a seed is not the same thing as saving a variety. Squash cross-pollinate readily with compatible kinds nearby, carried by bees you'll never see. Save seed out of a butternut grown alongside 3 other squash, and next year you may get something nobody has a name for. Sometimes it's a 9-pound disappointment. If you want the variety, grow one compatible kind that season, or hand-pollinate and tie the flower shut. Extension seed-saving guidance is consistent. With cucurbits, isolation is the whole ballgame. Number 5. The best corn ears. Everybody's heard it. Pick your biggest, prettiest ear and save it for seed. That advice will slowly ruin your corn. Corn is an outcrosser. It needs a crowd. Seed-saving references generally recommend saving from at least 100 plants for corn, because when the breeding population gets small, you get inbreeding depression.
Now we move from saved seed to living pieces, the parts a plant is already offering you for free.
Poor germination. Ears that shrink every year, no matter how carefully you pick the trophy. So save from many ears, not one. Shell a handful off each of a great many good plants and mix them, or trade with a neighbor growing the same variety. That's how the old open-pollinated corn survived. Not one perfect ear. A whole population kept moving. Number 6. Strawberry runners. That mess of stringy vines isn't clutter. It's the plant's reproductive system, offering you free plants, the 5-minute version. Sink a small pot of soil into the ground under a daughter plant. Pin the runner onto the soil with a rock or bent wire. Water it. In 4 to 6 weeks, it's rooted well enough to snip loose, and you lift the pot out with a whole new plant in it. Get them rooted by around the 1st of September. Late-rooted daughters underperform their whole first bearing year. One plant hands you the next one for nothing. Number 7. Tomato suckers. If you prune tomatoes, you've thrown away hundreds of these. Clemson Extension has shown them rooting readily, and University of Georgia Extension recommends the practice specifically for mid-season replacement plants. Take healthy suckers 3 to 4 inches long, strip the lower leaves, stand them in a jar with the bottom inch or 2 in water. In 1 to 2 weeks, you'll see roots. Once the roots are about an inch long, set them out. Why it matters. It's July, the garden centers are empty, and a sucker rooted now can be producing about the time your spring plants quit. One limit. Only take suckers off a clean plant. If it's got a leaf disease working on it, you're not cloning a tomato, you're cloning a problem. Sometimes pruning a tomato doesn't remove a plant, it makes another one. Number 8. Grape prunings. Every February, the grape rows produce an armload of cut cane, and most of it goes on the fire. Grapes propagate about as easily as anything here from dormant hardwood cuttings. Penn State puts it plainly: pencil-thick dormant wood, taken in winter, stored cool and damp until...
Some prunings are worth more than a replacement plant. They can preserve the exact fruit you're trying to keep.
Spring. The details that decide it. 1-year-old canes, meaning wood that was new green shoot last summer. Canes grown in full sun, not the spindly shaded stuff. 12 to 16 inches, 3 to 5 buds. And mark which end is up, because they will not root planted upside down. That brush pile is a nursery you haven't planted yet. If this is already more than you'll remember, I put the whole list into a field guide you can print. Free, links in the description. Back to it. Number 9. Fruit tree prunings. When you prune an apple or a pear in late winter, part of what falls on the ground is last season's growth. Smooth-barked, pencil-thick, with tight little pointed buds along it. That's scion wood. Penn State's guidance is to collect scion wood from the most recent season's growth, off fully dormant trees, generally January into February, and not while the wood is frozen. Pencil thickness.
A seed can give you a tree. That does not mean it gives you the same fruit back.
12 to 18-inch pieces off straight vertical shoots. Wrap it in moist, not wet, sphagnum. Seal it in a bag. and hold it in the refrigerator until grafting in early spring. Here's why that matters more than it sounds. Grafted, that wood grows into a tree that is genetically the same tree, same apple, same keeping quality. So if there's an old tree in a fence row making the best pie apple anybody around here remembers, and that tree is going, the tree is not what you have to save. A handful of pencil-sized twigs is. A branch you were about to burn may be carrying the exact variety you were trying to preserve. Number 10. Peach pits, apple seeds, and other fruit pits. Plant an apple seed and you'll get an apple tree. You will not get that apple. Seedling fruit trees don't come true to type. That's the entire reason grafting exists. So the pit in your hand is not a free copy of the tree you ate from. It's a genetic experiment. Every seed is a new cross, and the odds of it matching the parent are low. But every named variety we have started is somebody's seedling, where pits earn their keep, rootstock, and the occasional new variety. Just don't plant one expecting the same fruit in 10 years. That's the living material. Now the stuff that never comes back to life.
A good mulch often gets sold with the wrong story. Pine needles are one of the best examples.
Here's the trap. Once material stops being alive, most gardeners immediately reclassify it as fertilizer. That one move causes a surprising amount of damage. Number 11. Fallen leaves. Everyone knows leaves make compost. That's the second job. The first job of a fallen leaf isn't feeding the soil, it's covering it. Spread over a bed, leaves take the beating rain would otherwise deliver to bare ground. They cut compaction, hold moisture, keep weeds, seed in the dark, and level out the temperature swings. The organic matter is real but slow. The protection is immediate. Whole leaves mat down flat, so run the mower over the pile first. Before a leaf becomes food for the soil, it can serve as the soil's roof. Number 12. Pine needles. Here's where the internet gets half the story right and then runs off a cliff with it. The claim is that pine needles acidify soil. Fresh needles are acidic, around DF 3.2 to 3.8 coming off the tree. That part's true. Oregon State Extension is blunt about the rest. Pine needles do not make soil meaningfully more acidic. As they break down, microbes neutralize them. University of New Hampshire Extension says even a 2 to 3 inch layer won't change soil FIAF enough to measure. If you truly need to drop FIAF for blueberries, that takes elemental sulfur. So quit selling them as an acidifier.
This next one looks like a bargain right up until it poisons a bed. Cheap mulch is not always cheap.
And use them for what they are. A light, springy mulch that doesn't blow away and lets water through. Right material. Wrong reason, and the wrong reason is what makes people misuse it. Number 13. Grass clippings. Free mulch, if you respect 3 words. Dry, thin, untreated. University of Minnesota Extension says no more than 1 to 2 inches at a time and use dry clippings. Colorado State goes thinner still, recommending 1/4 inch layers and letting each dry before the next. Pile them on wet and thick, and they mat into a slimy layer that shuts oxygen and water out of the soil underneath. And the one that'll get you. Don't use clippings off a lawn treated with a broadleaf weed killer. Colorado State suggests staying off treated clippings for at least a month, and says plainly that some herbicides carry over for years. Dry, thin, herbicide-free. Number 14. Old hay and straw. This looks like the best deal in the county. Somebody's got last year's round bales gone musty, and they'll let you have them for hauling them off. 2 hidden risks, and the second one is serious. First is weed seed. Hay is a seed crop cut with the seed in it. Straw is cleaner, and certified weed-free straw cleaner still. Second is persistent herbicide. There's a family of broadleaf herbicides used on pasture and hay.
Some of the best garden material does almost nothing for nutrition. Its real power is light control.
Ground, aminopyralid, clopyralid, picloram, and they don't break down the way people assume. Oregon State Extension notes they can stay active in hay, grass clippings, manure, and even finished compost. They can degrade in as little as 30 days, but field reports have them still causing damage 3 and 4 years on. Tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, beans, and peas react at levels measured in parts per billion. The symptom is cupped, twisted, fern-like new growth. So before that hay touches a vegetable bed, ask where it was grown and whether the field was sprayed. If you can't get a straight answer, run a bioassay. A few pots of soil mixed with the material, 3 pea or bean seeds in each, a couple of clean control pots alongside, 4 weeks of watching. If the test pots come up twisted and the controls don't, you just saved your garden for the price of 6 bean seeds. Free mulch can get expensive when you don't know where it came from. Number 15. Plain brown cardboard. Cardboard is not fertile.
Wood is where a lot of gardeners get into trouble because surface use and soil use are not the same thing.
Fertilizer. Cardboard is a light switch. Its one job is blocking photosynthesis. Oregon State's sheet mulching guidance is overlapping layers of plain brown corrugated cardboard, edges overlapped by at least 8 inches, because weeds find any gap, no matter how small. Wet it thoroughly, then cover with 3 inches of mulch to hold it down. Pull off every bit of tape, every staple, every plastic label first, and skip glossy or heavily dyed cardboard. One limit worth respecting. Don't build a thick sealed layer right against the trunks or crowns of established plants. You want to smother weeds, not suffocate roots. Number 16. Newspaper and plain paper sacks. Same function, smaller scale, better precision. Where cardboard is clumsy around existing plants, newspaper tucks right in between rows and around stems. Colorado State recommends only 1 to 2 sheets thick under wood chips or clippings, and warns against thick layers since heavy carbon piled on can tie up nitrogen, and newspaper blows away in the lightest breeze, so lay it and cover it immediately. Number 17. Wood chips. Here's the distinction that decides everything about wood chips, and most people have never had it explained. On top of the soil, wood chips are one of the best mulches there is. Mixed into the soil, they cause real trouble. Colorado State Extension puts it directly. Wood chips on the surface do not tie up soil nitrogen, but incorporating them into soil.
Now we step out of the shed and into the kitchen, where a few stubborn garden myths really live.
Soil can create a nitrogen deficiency. The reason is simple. The microbes breaking that wood down need nitrogen, and they take it from wherever they're working. At the surface, they borrow from the surface, and your vegetable roots are 6 inches down, minding their own business, till those chips in and you've moved the whole operation into the root zone. So, paths around fruit trees and shrubs, perennial beds, surface mulch. And don't rototill fresh chips into a vegetable bed and expect a good year. Number 18. Sawdust. Sawdust is wood chips with far more surface area, and that changes the math against you. Colorado State advises against sawdust as mulch for exactly that reason. The finer the particle, the faster microbes get at it, and the faster they compete with your plants for nitrogen. It also packs down and sheds water instead of letting it through. Where it works, as a brown, carbon ingredient in a compost pile balanced against green material and as path cover. Never from pressure-treated or painted lumber, anywhere near food. Smaller wood, faster microbes, faster competition. Now, out of the kitchen. This is where the most stubborn myths live, and where a couple of genuinely useful techniques are hiding underneath them. Number 19. Vegetable peels and kitchen scraps. Everybody says compost them. There's a better option most people have never tried, and it needs no bin, no turning, no monitoring. Trench composting. Nebraska Extension describes it simply. Dig a trench 12 to 15 inches deep. Chop your...
Eggshells belong in that same myth pile. Good material, slow chemistry, and the wrong expectation.
Plant scraps small, mix them with a little soil, and backfill with at least 8 inches of soil on top. That 8 inches keeps raccoons and dogs out. Then walk away. Depending on soil temperature, it breaks down in a month to a year. Skip meat, bones, and fatty foods. The insight is location. Instead of hauling material to a pile, letting it finish, and hauling it back, you put it where next year's roots will be. Mark the spot. Number 20. Coffee grounds. Myth number 2, and it's a big one. Used coffee grounds are not acidic. After brewing, Oregon State Extension measures them close to neutral, around EF 6.5 to 6.8, because the acid went into your cup. Any EF change is short-lived. They will not acidify your blueberry bed, no matter how many buckets you haul. They're still worth saving. Nitrogen-bearing organic material, and as microbes work on them, they help bind soil particles into better structure. But there's a ceiling. Extension guidance is to keep grounds under about 20% of total compost volume. Oregon State soil scientist says plainly that people get too enthusiastic, and that she's seen raised beds ruined by too much coffee. Don't lay them thick as mulch either. Fine particles crust over and shed water. Coffee grounds are useful, just not for the reason the internet keeps repeating. Number 20.
Here's the one I teased earlier. Wood ash can help, but only if you treat it as a pH decision.
21. Eggshells. Myth number 3. Eggshells crushed around a tomato will not stop blossom end rot. Eggshell is calcium carbonate, same mineral as limestone, so the chemistry looks like it ought to work. The problem is time. University of Minnesota Extension is direct. Eggshells decompose too slowly to be effective, and they don't prevent blossom end rot. Illinois Extension puts the breakdown at 1 to 5 years, even when crushed, and calcium usually isn't the shortage anyway. Calcium travels through a plant with water, so when soil swings from bone-dry to soaked and back, the fruit can't get calcium, even when the soil is full of it. The fix is steady watering and mulch, not shells, so dry them, grind them fine, and put them in the compost as a slow contribution. Grind fine or don't bother. And if you truly suspect a shortage, get a soil test. An eggshell is a calcium resource. It is not an emergency calcium medicine. Number 22. Corn stalks and tough stems. Corn stalks, sunflower stalks, brassica stems. The woody stuff that won't break down in a season. Stop calling them fertilizer and start calling them structure. Chopped into 6-inch lengths, they're a coarse carbon that keeps a compost pile from packing into an airless mat. They're the framework a pile breathes through. Chop them, or they'll be sitting there whole 2 years from now. But here's the fence. Healthy residue can be recycled. Residue carrying disease or a pest problem should...
Last section now, and it may be the most overlooked job in the whole pile. Habitat.
Not be. Number 23. Wood ash, the one I promised you. The internet says wood ash is free potassium fertilizer. That framing is what causes the damage. Here's the accurate version. Wood ash is mostly calcium, roughly 1/4 to 1/2 by weight, with maybe 5 to 7% potassium. And that calcium acts as a limbing agent. University of New Hampshire Extension notes ash is more soluble and reactive than ground limestone and shifts soil TF faster than lime. Missouri Extension pegs its neutralizing power at roughly half that of limestone, so it takes about twice as much ash to move BF the same amount. Read that again. The main thing wood ash does is raise your soil FF. That makes it a soil chemistry decision, not a fertilizer decision. Michigan State's guidance is that ash works best where FF sits below about 6.5, and that pushing past that starts interfering with growth, because at high HF phosphorus, iron, manganese, and zinc.
A productive garden is not just soil and plants. It also needs safe corners where helpers can survive winter.
Get locked up where your plants can't reach them. So, the checklist. Only ash from clean, untreated wood. Soil test first. Small amounts, worked in rather than left on top. Not in winter, when it washes away, and not at seeding time, since the salts burn tender roots. Keep it off blueberries, rhododendrons, and azaleas. And if you heat with wood, one winter makes far more ash than a garden can absorb. Ash isn't a fertilizer question. It's a FAAA's question. Last section, and it's the one nobody expects. Some garden waste produces food without ever touching your soil. Number 24. Hollow and pithy dead stems. About 15% of bee species nest in cavities, and a good many of those nest inside dead plant stems. Small carpenter bees, leaf cutters, masked bees, raspberry canes, elderberry, coneflower, bee balm, sunflower stalks. Here's the detail that makes it work, out of recent NC State Extension research. Intact stems, the ones going into winter, uncut and unopened, generally don't get used because a bee needs an opening to get in.
But old-time thrift had limits. Some materials really do need to leave a food garden.
Thing is what creates the door. So in early winter, trim perennial stems back to between 1 and 2 feet tall. Then leave them. Bees move in the following season and their young overwinter inside, so those stems stand about 2 years, or until they fall on their own. Oregon State recommends the same on pithy shrubs, leaving an extra 8 to 10 inches of cane when you prune. Notice the path. It isn't stem to nutrient to vegetable. It's stem to bee to pollination to squash on your table. Sometimes the shortest route from garden waste to more food runs through an insect. Number 25. Twigs, brush, and a corner of leaf litter. Not everything needs cleaning up, and where you leave it matters more than whether you leave it. Lady beetles, ground beetles.
If you want a quick test tomorrow, run every handful through 5 simple questions before it leaves the garden.
Soldier beetles, lacewings, and hoverflies all overwinter in leaf litter, under loose bark, or in crevices in brush piles. Those are the same insects that spend your summer eating aphids and caterpillars. Illinois Extension notes, leaf litter lets insect predators shelter close to their prey. Texas A and Meters says 1 to 2 inches of it makes a real difference, so keep an untidy corner. Brush, twigs, leaf litter, a small log. Out at the edge, not in the middle of the beds. Now the nuance. Illinois Extension adds that if you have fruit trees carrying a fungal disease like...
So the lesson isn't to save everything. It's to know what each leftover piece is still capable of.
apple scab, remove that leaf litter because you're storing next spring's infection. Same with squash. Squash bugs overwinter as adults under crop debris, and extension services agree the best cultural control is clearing out old cucurbit vines after harvest. Biodiversity and sanitation aren't opposites. The trick is knowing which debris to leave and where. Which brings me to the third bucket. Because the honest version of this old thinking was never throw anything away. It was know what you're holding. 7 things that should leave your food garden. Diseased plant material, when it's a disease you're fighting. A cold compost pile is not a sterilizer. Reliable pathogen kill takes sustained temperatures of 131 degrees or better for several days, and a backyard pile that never heats up is just storing the problem. Weeds gone to seed. Same reason, and you'll spread them by the shovelful. Any hay, straw, grass, or manure you suspect of persistent herbicide. Don't gamble a vegetable bed on it. Heavily pest-infested crop debris. Don't build a hotel for the bug you're fighting. Ash from painted, treated, or trash-burned wood. Not a soil amendment, not ever. Fruit pits, if what you want is that same fruit. Save scion wood instead. And hybrid seed, if you expect it back the same next year. That's just not what hybrids do. Here's what I'd like you to do with all this. Tomorrow, carry a basket out with you. Before anything leaves the garden, run it through 5 questions. Can it become another plant? Can it preserve genetics worth keeping? Can it cover or build soil? Can it manage water? Can it support something that helps this place produce food? If all 5 come back, no, get rid of it. But most things don't come back, no 5 times. Most things have 1 job left. If you'd rather not keep all 25 in your head, I put the whole thing into a field guide you can print. Every material, what it actually does, the 5-minute version of how to use it, the mistake that ruins it, the season for it, and a plain list of what belongs in the trash, free, and the links in the description. Let me leave you with the thought that started all this. I don't believe those old gardens were productive because people knew a miracle fertilizer we've forgotten. I've looked for it. It isn't there. I think they were productive because almost nothing left the place before it had finished its job. The bean pod finished being a seed. The leaf finished being a roof. The branch finished being a variety. The stem finished being a house. What's left after all that isn't waste. It's just the part that's done. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.